The Orion expanse stretched like a wound across the cosmos, cold, black, and indifferent. Stars glimmered like distant promises, but out here, promises were meaningless. Convoys slipped through these sectors hoping for survival, and most didn't make it. Commander Elias Voss watched the feed with a quiet intensity, fingers tapping the edge of the console. His ship, the Resolute, had been silent for hours, orbiting just beyond the convoy's sensor range. He didn't need to be closer. Voss understood the patterns of hunters, calculating, patient, merciless. The convoy was a fragile thread in the expanse's web, 30 transport vessels, overcrowded with refugees fleeing the collapse of Faraday Colony. Their engines burned blue and orange streaks against the black void, a fragile heartbeat in a galaxy that had learned to ignore suffering. Voss recognized the signs immediately: the jitter in the convoy's sensor net, the sudden voids where patrol ships should have been, the unnatural calm before a storm. And then came the signal. Vulcan Hunter fleet detected. Surrounding convoy. Voss's jaw tightened. The Vulcan weren't just predators, they were orchestrators of despair. Their ships were sleek, angular, and fast beyond human engineering. They hunted with precision and a cruel intelligence that considered mercy a weakness. And mercy was a concept humans clung to, sometimes to their detriment, sometimes to their glory. Inside the convoy, Lieutenant Maris Kellen tried to maintain composure. "They're here," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. The bridge hummed with tension. Refugees pressed against viewports, eyes wide, uncomprehending. Children huddled against parents. Adults whispered prayers into the void, half hoping, half fearing that they had already been abandoned. "They've blocked every exit," said Harnick, a transport pilot, voice tight with dread. "Every jump point, every subspace route. We're sitting ducks." A murmur ran through the bridge, a collective acknowledgement that hope was evaporating. Voss watched them from his distant perch. His mind raced, not with fear, but with calculation. He'd been in worse situations, and he had survived, not because he was stronger than the enemy, but because he refused to surrender. Humans were clever that way, resourceful, defiant, and that defiance could be contagious. From the convoy's perspective, the stars seemed to darken, as if the universe itself had conspired to suffocate them. The Vulcan fleet appeared first as glints in the distance, then as massive silhouettes, more predator than ship. Every vessel was armed to the teeth, bristling with weapons that could vaporize a transport in seconds. Every hull bore marks of 1,000 kills. Captain Reel, the convoy commander, clenched his fists at the console. "This is it," he muttered. His voice cracked, betraying exhaustion. Don't stand a chance." A child's cry echoed down the corridor. A mother tried to calm him, her hand shaking. Humans survived because they cared, because empathy drove them to action when survival demanded cruelty. And that somewhere in the pattern of cosmic irony was the one thing the Vulcan underestimated. Voss adjusted the holographic display in his ship, fitting himself fragments of the convoy's telemetry, the Vulcan fleet's trajectory, and probabilities of engagement. The numbers were dire. Any conventional attack would end with the humans obliterated, reduced to smoldering wreckage and silence. Yet a deeper calculation emerged. Not probability, but possibility. Humans could manipulate chaos. Humans could improvise miracles. And sometimes, the improbable was all they had. A flicker in the sensors caught Voss's eye. A dormant gravitational anomaly hung near the edge of the Systeman, uncharted singularity, pulsing faintly. Unnoticed by the Vulcan, the odds just changed, he thought. Back on the convoy, the refugees were growing restless. Panic seeped into every corner. Systems were overheating from overuse, supplies dwindling, children crying in corridors that smelled of recycled air and fear. Lieutenant Kellen's hands trembled over the controls. "We have no tactical advantage," she said, voice hollow. "We can't fight them. We can't run." A silence settled over the bridge, the kind that presses into the chest and refuses to leave. And then, as if drawn by desperation itself, someone somewhere in the void spoke the unspoken. "We can't let them die." The words weren't from the convoy, nor from any visible ally. They were the echo of human will, transmitted through intent, defiance, and the quiet understanding that surrender was not an option. Voss smiled grimly, a ghost of his old military persona flickering in the shadows of his mind. Then I will show them why humans don't give up. In the darkness of the expanse, engines roared. One human vessel emerged from the void, a solitary silhouette against the immensity of space. It carried relics of an older Terran era, weapons and tech lost to time. Technology that shouldn't exist, possible machines capable of bending physics to human will. The Vercon paused, sensors flickering. Predators can sense courage, and they always underestimate it. Voss's hands moved with the precision of habit. His heart beat a rhythm he had known since his first engagement with the Vercan: fear, recognition, and then cold focus. He did not fight for victory. He fought because it was necessary. Because these humans deserved a chance to survive. Survival was a human art form. As the Resolute prepared its approach, the first Vercan destroyers adjusted course. They did not yet know what was coming. Somewhere in the convoy, a child pressed her face against the viewport. Her eyes reflected the approaching human ship, and for a moment, the endless void seemed smaller, warmer, alive. Not luck, not fate. Something greater, quiet, and immeasurable threaded through this moment. A pattern that whispered of mercy and order, hidden behind the chaos of battle. Voss's voice came through the convoy's: emergency comes, calm, resolute, and unwavering. I am here. Hold on. The Vercan fleet tightened their formation, engines burning hotter, weapons primed. They were confident. They had never seen a human stand alone. And in the darkness, a single human ship glided forward, carrying the weight of hope and the audacity of life itself. Somewhere in the shadows, the galaxy began to hold its breath, and somewhere in the quiet infinity of the stars, the humans began to pray. The Vercan fleet shimmered into full formation. Angular lines of death moving in perfect synchrony, weapons glinting like predatory eyes. 30 ships surrounding 30 fragile transports, and at the center, the humans cowered or tried to be. The word trapped was inadequate. The convoy wasn't just surrounded, was already half buried in despair. Voss watched through the feed aboard the Resolute, could feel the tension radiating from the convoy's crews like a pulse through space. Every hesitation, every breath, was transmitted in tiny electromagnetic vibrations, a subtle dance of fear and hope. He adjusted the ship's trajectory, angling for the gravitational anomaly at the system's edge. Its pull was slight, almost imperceptible, but in human hands, subtle forces could become devastating weapons. The Vercan believed themselves masters of space. They had never accounted for the ingenuity of desperation. Inside the convoy, Lieutenant Kellen tried to keep morale intact. She barked orders, rerouted power to shields, and recalculated jump vectors. Every second was measured against the inevitability of death, yet she refused to show panic. Human courage wasn't loud. It was in the refusal to quit, the quiet insistence to act even when the universe said otherwise. A destroyer cut closer, its weapons charging, green plasma coiling like living serpents. "They're going to hit us in 60 seconds, Kellen shouted, voice tight. "We don't have the firepower, then. We'll make them hesitate," a voice interrupted. Not human, not alien, but it carried authority. Voss's comm activated automatically, his calm voice threading through the chaos. "Lieutenant, get your people ready. You're about to see why humans fight when all seems lost." Kellen's hands froze on the console. Is it a miracle, coincidence, or simply human stubbornness? Voss guided the Resolute into the Singularity's edge, skimming its event horizon. Sensors screamed. Systems glitched under the gravitational tide. The Vercan fleet detected the anomaly and hesitated a momentary pause that could be measured in microseconds, yet it stretched to eternity in the minds of the humans below. "Hold tight," Voss murmured. His fingers danced across the interface, activating the ancient Terran devices, the relic tech that had no right to function in this era. Gravity manipulators hummed softly, bending space like clay, a subtle distortion that could not yet be seen, only felt. The lead Vercan destroyer fired. Plasma bolts streaked toward the convoy. Shields flared, groaning under stress. But the Resolute moved like water around a stone, invisible, intangible. The first trick of human ingenuity, to be present without being predictable. Inside the convoy, the transports shuddered. Panic surged. Children screamed. Adults gripped anything they could hold on to. Kellen's heart raced not from fear, but from awe. The humans were alive in ways that defied expectation. Survival, she realized, was not just about technology. It was about willpower, about refusing to yield even when all evidence dictated annihilation. And then the anomaly pulsed. Voss released the carefully constrained energies from the Resolute's gravity matrix. The effect rippled outward, distortions in space-time, subtle at first, but enough to pull at the edges of the Verkan fleet. Hulls groaned. Navigation systems struggled to compensate. The predators were strong, precise, and terrifying, but they had never contended with a human's capacity for improvisation. The first destroyer jerked violently, its engines straining. Plasma fire missed its mark, dissipating into the void. Sensors pinged anomalies, confusion rippling across the fleet like a virus. Voss allowed himself a faint smile. Humans could not always outgun their enemies, but they could outthink them. And when thinking failed, they could endure longer than any algorithm anticipated. Inside the convoy, a man looked at the viewport and whispered, almost to himself, "This can't just be an accident." His words drifted across the bridge, unanswered, yet understood. Humans believed in order and chance simultaneously. They believed in courage because it worked, and in God because the improbable kept happening. A second destroyer shifted course, attempting to flank the convoy. Voss anticipated it. He tilted the Resolute's thrusters and sent the gravitational field surging toward it. Its space buckled. The destroyer screamed through microsingularities, metal twisting, engine straining. Then silence. Just a flicker in the void, the predator gone without a trace. Kellen's bridge crew stared, eyes wide. Did we just... Yes, Voss's voice cut through, steady and composed. You just witnessed why humans survive. But the victory was fragile. Voss knew better than anyone that one miscalculation, one overreach, could mean annihilation for every life in the convoy. The Resolute wasn't invincible. It was an extension of human ingenuity, but ingenuity required calculation, courage, and faith. He took a breath, feeling the tiny presence of something greater, not audible, but undeniable. It was in the timing of the anomalies, in the precision of survival, in the fact that he was alive to act when hundreds of others had already perished. He whispered a silent prayer, not out of fear, but out of acknowledgement. Let me do right by them. The Verkan regrouped, sensing that the humans were not mere prey. Their approach became cautious, almost respectful in their methodical menace. They had not faced humans like this before. Predators can adapt, but only slowly, and by the time they adapt, humans have already moved again. The convoy began to shift under Kellen's guidance, tentative and hesitant. They followed her lead, responding to the confidence radiating through Voss's voice. The transports, once panicked and vulnerable, now felt a thread of hope, fragile but tangible, connecting them to something larger than themselves. In the void, the Resolute moved with fluid grace, bending gravity like a maestro conducting a symphony of destruction. Each maneuver was deliberate, precise, designed to disrupt without reckless waste. Voss was not just fighting, he was teaching. Teaching humans how to survive by showing that fear was not a kajit, was a tool, a catalyst for ingenuity. And somewhere, far beyond human comprehension, the stars themselves seemed to pulse with quiet acknowledgement. A pattern of survival, improbable yet inevitable, threaded through the void. The Verkan hunters, for all their experience, had never encountered humans who fought like this, not with brute force alone, but with relentless creativity, courage, and the audacity to challenge fate itself. Voss allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. The convoy wasn't safe. Not yet. But for the first time, the humans believed they could be. And as the first singularity wave struck another Verkan destroyer, tearing it apart from the inside, Voss realized that survival was no longer about numbers or technology. It was about one man, one human, willing to become the instrument of hope against insurmountable odds. The void had been silent, but now it sang a song of defiance only humans could hear. The convoy shuddered under the growing pressure. Even with Voss orchestrating the Resolute's maneuvers from afar, the Verkan were relentless, circling like sharks that knew no exhaustion. Each pulse of their engines, each hum of their weapons, resonated with calculated menace. Space itself seemed to tighten around the transports, compressing hope into something almost tangible. Lieutenant Kellen gritted her teeth, scanning every sensor readout. "We've lost 2 transports to direct fire," she shouted, her voice raw with desperation. On the bridge, families screamed, clutching anything solid. A father cradled his daughter while staring blankly at the viewport, whispering fragments of prayers in a language he wasn't sure God could understand. Voss observed from the Resolute, his face etched with concentration. The humans were fragile, but they weren't done yet. Could see it the way fear sharpened their awareness, forced them into innovation, made them cling to life with stubborn precision. He could hear it in Kellen's voice, the balance of terror and resolve. He tapped into the gravitational anomaly again, sending microsingularities to warp space just enough to create confusion. One Vulcan destroyer misjudged a trajectory and collided with debris, tearing its hull. Another veered too close to a transport, narrowly avoiding disaster. Humans, one of the alien hunters hissed over the comm network, their voice guttural and reverberating. "You dapped too quickly." Before it could finish, the destroyer's systems flared and collapsed, pulled apart from within. The Vulcan paused, their collective instincts sensing the anomaly. They were predators, yes, but even predators have limits. They had not encountered Ingenuity dressed in human flesh. Inside the convoy, chaos raged, emergency lights flickered, alarms blared, and corridors vibrated with the pulse of dying engines. Kellen barked commands, rerouting power to shields, diverting life support, trying to keep the fragile thread of life intact. A transport vented atmosphere from a hull breach, and she had to pull her crew back just in time. "We're not going to make it," cried one of the engineers. Well, Kellen cut him off, voice shaking but resolute. "No, you will make it. Follow my orders. Trust me." She didn't yet understand the full scale of the human force that had arrived. She only sensed it, a quiet, invisible hand guiding survival. Sometimes humans lived not because of strategy, but because someone refused to accept failure. Voss adjusted the Resolute's vector, angling closer to the anomaly. He could feel the strain in the ship's frame, the limits of the Terran relic tech pushing against physics itself. But it held. Always it held, because human ingenuity thrived at the edge of impossibility. The first casualties weighed on him, though. He wasn't invincible. Every life lost pressed against his conscience, a reminder that courage alone could not erase mortality. Yet he could inspire. He could protect enough to tip the scales. "Brace for impact?" shouted Kellen, as another Vulcan destroyer opened fire directly on a transport. Plasma streaked through space, slicing the hull. Sparks ignited inside corridors. People screamed. Yet before the energy could obliterate them, the Resolute warped space again, pulling the destroyer slightly off course. The plasma bolts missed, striking empty void. The survivors gasped, some clutching their hearts, others staring in disbelief. Was it luck? Fate? Divine intervention? They didn't know. All they knew was that they were alive. For now. Voss allowed himself a small grin. Humans were more than machines or weapons. They were patterns of resilience, of will, of empathy. The Vulcan couldn't anticipate that. They couldn't measure it, and that more than any weapon was humanity's edge. Us. A sudden alert on the Resolute's console made him frown. Another destroyer had locked onto him. Its sensors pierced through the anomaly, detecting the Resolute's presence. Its weapons charged, plasma coils humming with lethal energy. Voss's heart remained steady. He had one move left risky, perhaps suicidal, but necessary. The gravitational anomaly could do more than distort it, could crush, implode, and collapse space on itself. A single misstep, however, would tear the Resolute apart, taking him and the convoy with it. Sometimes he murmured under his breath. The only way forward is to embrace the impossible. Inside the convoy, Kellen noticed the Resolute moving into the gravitational field's center. "What is he?" she began, but then sensors lit up with strange readings. The anomaly pulsed. The Vulcan destroyer in pursuit shuddered violently. Systems failed. Weapons discharged randomly, unable to cope with the distortions of space itself. Then, in a blink, it tore apart. Not an explosion, nothing cinematic, nothing grand, but the subtle tearing of space around its hull. As though the universe itself had decided the Predator had overstepped. The remaining Vulcan ships faltered. They were skilled hunters, but they hadn't accounted for humans using the laws of physics as a weapon. The convoy shuddered again, but this time in awe, not despair. Voss steadied himself, sending a final pulse through the singularity. The remaining destroyers wavered, confused, and began to retreat. Humans had survived. Against impossible odds, Ingenuity, courage, and relentless will had prevailed. Somewhere deep in the convoy, a child whispered, "Not luck." Someone wanted us to live, and in that moment, the quiet presence of something greater, something beyond understanding, seemed to echo back. Voss's voice carried over the comes one last time before silence settled. "Stay alive. That's your first victory. The rest we'll make together." He looked at the stars stretching infinitely beyond him, sensing the subtle hand of providence, quiet but undeniable. It wasn't miracles, it was humans reaching for them, daring the universe to challenge their resolve. And the Verkin learned a lesson they would not forget. Humans weren't just prey. Humans could bend reality itself to protect life, to survive, to defy annihilation. The convoy, battered but intact, followed the pulse of hope that Voss had ignited. Fear remained, but it was tempered by the revelation that the impossible was not just possible, it was human. And somewhere in the void, the humans began to believe again. The silence after the battle was deafening. The convoy drifted through the Orion expanse, wounded but alive, each transport a fragile heartbeat against the black void. Kellen stood on the bridge of the Aurora, the largest transport, staring at the sensor feed as if expecting the Verkin to materialize again. "They're gone, for now," she whispered, though the words felt hollow. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from exhaustion, the kind that seeps into bones when life itself teeters on the edge of annihilation. Voss, aboard the Resolute, observed from a safe distance, or as safe as one could be while playing at the edge of space-time. The Resolute pulsed faintly, a testament to Terran relics and human ingenuity, bending gravitational fields, twisting reality just enough to survive. But the strain on the ship and on him was immense. Even humans had limits. He allowed himself a moment to breathe. Even in the quiet, he could feel the weight of responsibility pressing against him. Every life in that convoy was a thread in the fragile tapestry he had vowed to protect. Fail, and they would all unravel. And yet, even in victory, doubt gnawed at him. Am I enough? The question was quiet, almost imperceptible, but it lingered. Humans never fought without facing the truth of their mortality, and he was no exception. A flicker on the sensor array drew his attention. The Verkin were returning, faster, smarter, angrier. It was no longer hunting, they were retaliating. The survivors of the first wave were valuable now, too valuable to lose. Voss's jaw tightened. He could feel the singularity pulsing nearby, alive in its own rhythm. He had one chance to turn this battle into more than survival. One chance to teach the Verkin what humans could do when cornered. "Hold position," he murmured to himself, fingers flying over the console. "Let them come." Inside the convoy, the humans sensed the tension but did not understand its magnitude. They clung to each other, hearts racing, minds racing, praying silently in the way humans always did when the universe seemed to ignore them. Some whispered into comes, some to the void, some simply stared at the stars and said, "This can't just be an accident." The first Verkin ships arrived at the anomaly's edge. Their sensors blinked, engines flickered. Something was wrong, though they couldn't yet understand it. Voss guided the Resolute closer, carefully threading the line between annihilation and control. Each pulse of the singularity threatened to tear the ship apart. Each maneuver could either crush the enemy or destroy his own people. And somewhere deep inside him, he felt it, a quiet presence, steady and unwavering. Not a voice, not a shape, just the undeniable sense of order, of balance, of a force guiding the improbable in his favor. Humans called it luck, some called it faith, else simply called it the moment when survival demanded courage. He activated the next sequence. Gravity waves pulsed outward, tugging at Verkin's ships with precise, devastating force. One destroyer snapped in half, another screamed through microsingularities before being torn apart. The fleet faltered, confusion rippling across its formation. But the Verkin adapted quickly. Their coordination tightened, targeting the convoy with renewed precision. Plasma bolts streaked across space, striking the Aurora's shields. Sparks flew, corridors shook, and inside, humans screamed. Kellen barked orders, rerouting power, patching hull breaches, trying to maintain order against the inevitable panic. A man ran past her, clutching a child, tears streaking his face. "Why are we still alive?" he cried. "Because someone refuses to let you die." She shouted back, though even she felt the weight of uncertainty pressing in. Humans survive not by certainty, but by refusing to succumb to despair. Voss knew the next moments would define everything. The singularity could either obliterate the remaining fleet or collapse uncontrollably, taking the convoy with it. One mistake, one hesitation, and there would be nothing left. He took a deep breath, eyes narrowing. Sometimes he whispered, "The only way through the abyss is straight into it." The Resolute surged forward, threading between the gravitational pulses, targeting the Vulcan flagship. He synchronized the ship's relic tech with the anomaly's energy, amplifying the field, bending space with precision that bordered on the impossible. The flagship shuddered, hull warping, engines straining. It fired in desperation, but its shots missed, dissipating harmlessly into warp space. Voss could feel the tension radiating through the void, the universe holding its breath. Inside the convoy, Kellen watched, eyes wide. Is that real?" she whispered, almost to herself. The humans aboard were alive, witnessing what should have been impossible. They didn't understand the science, the physics, the calculated risk. They only felt it hope threading through fear, courage threading through despair. And then came the scream, not mechanical, not alien, but a sound of impossible destruction. The Vulcan flagship collapsed inward, consumed by the amplified singularity, its death throes sending shockwaves through the fleet. Other ships faltered, engines straining, some retreating. Voss's hands shook slightly, the adrenaline finally catching up. He had survived. The convoy had survived. And yet, the cost was clear. Every move carried the weight of potential disaster. Humans weren't invincible. They were relentless, clever, and empathetic, but not immortal. He exhaled slowly, feeling the quiet presence again. Somewhere, beyond comprehension, the improbable had favored them. Not miracles exactly, not divine intervention in overt form, just a sense that life, defiance, and courage were threads woven into the very fabric of existence. In the convoy, children laughed nervously, parents hugged tightly, and Kellen allowed herself the barest flicker of relief. The immediate danger had passed, but she knew, deep in her bones, that the war was far from over. Voss looked out at the void, at the scattered remnants of the Vulcan fleet, and whispered, almost to himself, "Not luck. Someone wanted us to survive." The stars stretched infinitely, silent witnesses to human tenacity. And somewhere in the darkness, the humans began to believe again, not just in themselves, but in the audacity of life. And somewhere in the expanse, the hunters realized that one human could be more than an enemy. One human could be a force of nature. The expanse was deceptively quiet. The stars glimmered, indifferent, their cold brilliance mocking the fragile pulse of life aboard the convoy. For a brief moment, humans could almost believe in reprieve. But Voss knew better. And Space.com was not safety. It was the moment before the storm returned. The Resolute drifted near the convoy, engines humming low, a faint silhouette against the void. Voss ran through the sensors again, counting hull breaches, shield failures, and crew fatigue. The humans were alive, yes, but survival was no longer just about surviving attacks. It was about surviving themselves, their fear, their doubt, their despair. Inside the convoy, Kellen paced the bridge of the Aurora, trying to maintain composure. Supplies were critically low. Power fluctuations threatened life support in multiple transports. And worst of all, the crew of one smaller ship, the Halcyon, had lost cohesion entirely. They were drifting, systems failing, and their comms went dead halfway through Voss's last message. A child's voice came over a shaky channel. "Is anyone there?" Kellen swallowed. "We're here. We're all here," she said. But the words felt fragile, inadequate. Humans survived in spite of fear, but sometimes fear threatened to undo them from within. Voss studied the readings. The Halcyon was in a gravitational dead zone near the anomaly's edge, too close to risk a full rescue mission, yet too far to leave them to die. Any attempt would expose him to concentrated Vulcan fire, should the hunters return sooner than anticipated. He closed his eyes for a moment. Survival wasn't just strategy. It was judgment, empathy, and courage, qualities humans prized, yet often demanded a toll he could not measure. Elias, a voice called through the comms, low and measured. His second in command, Merrick, sensed his hesitation. Can't leave them. No, Voss said. The word carried weight. But neither can we risk the convoy. Not yet. I need a plan. Voss leaned into the console, fingers flying, heart steady despite the rising tension. He could bend gravity, manipulate singularities, but he could not bend human limits. Each second mattered. Each decision would carry the weight of lives. In the convoy, Kellen's voice cut through again. If we don't act, Halcyon is gone. If we do, we might all be gone. Her hand hovered over the come button, trembling. Humans always felt this, the unbearable weight of choice, when the wrong action meant death. Voss's eyes narrowed. He imagined the Halcyon drifting helplessly, systems failing. Imagined the panic aboard the transports, the children pressed to windows, the parents whispering desperate prayers. And somewhere deep inside him, he felt it, the subtle presence that had guided survival so far. Not luck, not chance. Something else, quiet, patient, and infinite, made a decision. Prepare an extraction vector, he said, voice calm but decisive. We're going in. Every human on that ship counts. Merrick's eyes widened. You're taking the Resolute into the dead zone? Against all protocols? Yes, Voss said, tone unyielding. Because humans don't survive by following protocols, they survive by refusing to surrender. Inside the convoy, Kellen relayed the orders. Engineers and pilots braced themselves, hearts hammering. Fear was universal, yet courage was contagious. They followed her lead, trusting the human who had emerged from the void to protect them. The Resolute accelerated toward the dead zone, gravity bending subtly around its hull. Voss guided the ship with precision, threading past micro-singularities, manipulating space to avoid catastrophic collapse. He felt the ship shudder under the strain, but humans were relentless. When the universe pushed, they pushed back harder. The Verkan sensors flared. They had returned, detecting the Resolute's movement. Weapons charged, engines flaring, as destroyers adjusted intercept courses. The hunters were predictable now, driven by the need to kill, blinded by arrogance. Voss welcomed them. The closer they came, the more he could use the dead zone to his advantage. Inside the dead zone, the Halcyon floated like a wounded animal, lights flickering, engines sputtering. Its crew clutched whatever they could, fear pressing into every corner of the ship. The void outside seemed to stretch infinitely, mocking their vulnerability. Voss's voice came through the comms, steady and unwavering. We're here, trust me, hold on. A pulse of the singularity pushed against the Halcyon, stabilizing it temporarily, and then Voss maneuvered alongside, deploying tether drones to latch onto the fragile vessel. The crew on the Halcyon gasped, tears streaking their faces, as hope flickered where despair had lived. But salvation came with risk. The Verkan fleet was closing fast. Plasma bolts streaked past the Resolute, narrowly missing the convoy. Voss calculated the timing perfectly, warping space just enough to redirect energy away from the tethered ship. Every heartbeat was measured, deliberate, a dance with annihilation itself. Inside the Halcyon, a young engineer whispered, barely audible, "Are we going to make it?" Not luck. Voss's voice crackled over the comms. Someone wants you to live. And then catastrophe almost struck. One destroyer, faster than any calculation anticipated, closed in on the extraction. Voss's hands moved with precision, firing a micro-singularity pulse. The destroyer shuddered, engines straining. But the shockwave rocked both the Resolute and the Halcyon. Lights flickered, alarms screamed, and humans clung to anything solid. In that moment, Voss felt the weight of his choice. Every decision carried the gravity of lives, every miscalculation a funeral yet to come, yet he did not hesitate. Humanity had never survived by hesitation. The Halcyon stabilized, tethered to the Resolute. Voss guided them both out of the dead zone every second, a test of nerve, calculation, and trust. The Verkan destroyers faltered, unable to adapt quickly enough to the shifting singularities. And then finally, the dead zones policed. The convoy was safe for now. Every human aboard had survived, yet the memory of fear, doubt, and risk would linger. Survival was not comfort. It was responsibility, and Voss bore it like a mantle heavier than any armor. Inside the convoy, Kellen exhaled shakily. She turned to her crew, eyes wide with awe and exhaustion. "We survived," she whispered. But she knew it wasn't luck. Humans had survived because one man refused to surrender, because ingenuity bent reality, because courage defied despair. Voss gazed into the void, sensing the quiet presence again. Not miracles, not divine displays, just subtle guidance threading through the improbable, shaping the survival of life against insurmountable odds. Humans called it faith. They called it hope. They called it what it was. The unseen weight of everything that mattered. And somewhere in the vast silence, the humans began to understand that survival is not given, it is earned, forged by courage and defended by defiance. The convoy floated in uneasy silence. Every sensor ping, every hum of distant engines was a reminder that survival was temporary. Even after the miraculous extraction of the halcyon, fear had not lifted, it had merely evolved, sharpening into a keen edge that cut deeper than any plasma bolt. Voss observed from the resolute eyes scanning the horizon. The Verkon were regrouping, their movements precise and calculated, each ship a predator learning from previous failures. They were faster now, more coordinated, and their weapons had been recalibrated to bypass simple gravitational tricks. Survival required more than ingenuity, required audacity. Merrick approached Voss on the bridge, voice low but urgent. "Commander, the Verkon won't stop. They'll come back with reinforcements. We can't just outmaneuver them again. Eventually they'll corner the convoy, and then—" His words trailed into silence, because no one could finish that sentence without dread.
House.
Voss's jaw tightened. "Then we make the corner impossible to reach." He didn't need to elaborate. Humans didn't survive by cowering. They survived by shaping the battlefield itself. Inside the convoy, Kellen paced, distributing orders and rerouting energy to the most critical systems. Pairs were ongoing, but fatigue weighed heavily on every crew member. Children clung to parents, whispering prayers in languages they barely understood. Adults prayed too, not in hope of miracles, but in acknowledgement of the improbable survival they had already achieved. Faith in humans, faith in life, faith in the subtle order threading through chaos, these were their lifelines. The first Verkan ships appeared on the periphery far faster than expected. Their sensors had adapted. They knew the Resolute's tricks now, anticipating singularity distortions and gravitational bends. Plasma fire streaked across the void, precise, lethal, designed to overwhelm. Voss's hands moved like lightning, guiding the Resolute through subtle space-time shifts, twisting gravity to deflect incoming fire. But one destroyer was too fast, too close. Its plasma struck the ship's shield, jolting the Resolute violently. Sparks flew. Alarms screamed. "Brace for impact," Merrick shouted, holding onto the console. Voss's mind raced. There was only one solution. One human solution. He could divert the Singularity's energy into a controlled collapse near the destroyer. But doing so meant bringing the Resolute dangerously close to the brink. One miscalculation, and the ship and the convoy would be destroyed. He exhaled slowly, knowing what had to be done. "I'll draw them in," he said, voice calm but heavy. "Keep the convoy safe. Get them clear." Merrick's eyes widened. "You can't. I have to," Voss interrupted. "If they destroy me first, they'll destroy everyone." Inside the convoy, Kellen's voice came over, comes tense but trusting. "Understood. Get us out of here, Commander. Do what you must." Voss pushed the Resolute forward, directly toward the Verkan destroyer. Gravity pulses surged outward, warping space in impossible patterns. The destroyer followed, drawn to the collapsing field like a moth to flame. Every calculation in Voss's mind threaded the razor line between annihilation and victory. The destroyer fired relentlessly, plasma lancing the Resolute's shields. Systems overloaded. Sparks rained across the bridge. Voss gritted his teeth, focusing entirely on the next sequence, the culmination of ingenuity, courage, and raw human will. He activated the Singularity's final pulse, concentrating all energy forward. The destroyer's hull twisted, its engines tearing themselves apart in the impossible gravitational stress. Metal groaned, systems failed, and finally, with a shriek of unrelenting physics, it collapsed inward. The void swallowed it entirely, but the pulse's recoil struck the Resolute. Plates warped. Hull plates warped. The ship trembled violently. Voss gritted his teeth, stabilizing with every ounce of focus. He had survived, but just barely. In the convoy, Kellen felt the tremor reverberate through the transports. Panic threatened to surge, but she steadied herself, realizing that Voss had sacrificed not his life, but his safety, to ensure theirs. Humans survived because one would endure everything to protect the many. Somewhere deep in the void, a crew member of the convoy whispered, "Not luck." Someone wanted him to live too. Faith, subtle and omnipresent, lingered in the spaces between heartbeats and human action. An unseen thread weaving through the improbable. Voss exhaled slowly, staring at the aftermath. The Verkan fleet had lost a flagship. Other destroyers faltered, their formation fractured. For now, the convoy had space to breathe, but the war was far from over. Humans were still outnumbered, still under threat. Yet their survival so far proved a singular truth. Courage, creativity, and empathy could bend the impossible. He allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. Not miracles, not divine intervention in visible form. Just the subtle intelligence threading through the improbable, favoring life when defiance was absolute. Merrick approached him quietly. "Commander." "That was necessary," Voss interrupted, voice low but steady. "Humans survive because someone refuses to surrender. Someone acts when the rest hesitate. That's all we need to know." And somewhere across the convoy, children laughed nervously. Parents embraced with silent tears. And the humans realized the gravity of what had happened. One human had stood against annihilation and survived. One human had become a force that even the galaxy's deadliest hunters could not ignore. And somewhere in the infinite black, the humans began to understand the true cost and value of courage. The expanse had shifted. The stars seemed colder now, distant observers to a war that had become personal. The Verkan fleet, battered but unbroken, emerged from the void with a calculated fury. Every destroyer was calibrated to kill, every sensor sharpened to detect the subtle distortions humans had relied upon. The hunters had learned, they had adapted. Inside the convoy, fear pulsed like a living thing. Even with the Resolute nearby, transporting the wounded, patching shields, guiding the transports, humans felt the weight of inevitability. Children clutched parents. Adults muttered prayers under their breath, fingers tightening around control panels or the railings that separated them from the void. Kellen gritted her teeth, pacing the bridge of the Aurora. "They're coming faster than before," she shouted. "If we can't hold them." Her voice faltered. Even the strongest among humans sometimes wavered when the impossible pressed in from all sides. Voss watched from the Resolute, calm but intensely focused. Calm because panic would be fatal. Focused because human ingenuity had to outpace alien precision. He had no illusions. The Verkan would not be caught unprepared twice. Victory now demanded audacity, creativity, and the subtle edge humans wielded best. Courage born of empathy and stubborn will. "Prep the singularity," he ordered, fingers dancing across the controls. "We'll need to make this battlefield ours." "Time and space are weapons too." Merrick hesitated. "Commander, the next pulse will strain the ship beyond limits. One miscalculation." "I know," Voss said, voice steady. "I've survived worse." The first Verkan destroyers closed in, weapons blazing. Plasma bolts tore through the void, striking shields with thunderous energy. Hulls groaned. Sparks rained inside corridors. The convoy shuddered, every human aboard feeling the raw edge of survival. Fear was universal, but so was resolve. Voss activated the singularity pulse, weaving gravitational distortions through the Verkan formation. Ships lurched unpredictably, engines straining. Micro-singularities tore through hulls, but the hunters were experienced. They adapted quickly, reforming their attack patterns with terrifying precision. Inside the convoy, humans screamed and ducked as alarms blared. A transport was struck. Hull breaches spread smoke through corridors. Kellen rushed to reroute life support, but the systems were failing faster than she could repair them. Desperation pressed in like gravity, but humans were resilient. They clung to one another, innovating, patching, improvising, refusing to succumb. Voss's mind raced. Every calculation, every prediction, had limits. But humans thrived in the impossible. He manipulated the singularity with surgical precision, creating a corridor of distorted space. Destroyers were funneled, caught in patterns they could not predict. Every pulse was designed to protect the convoy, but also to inflict damage without sacrificing human lives unnecessarily. Yet even as he acted, a thought lingered. Every choice carries a cost. He saw the first casualties, a small transport torn open. Crew lost despite every effort. Guilt pressed into him, but he did not falter. Humans survived because they acted, because they endured, even when the consequences were unbearable. One Vulcan destroyer broke formation and charged directly at the Aurora. Plasma bolts lanced across space, shields overloaded. Inside, Kellen braced, fear and determination coiling together. The transport trembled as the ship shuddered violently. Voss reacted instantly, manipulating a microsingularity to intercept the destroyer. Space bent around it, tearing engines apart, and the Vulcan vessel collapsed inward. But the force rocked the Aurora, sending sparks cascading from panels. Humans screamed, holding tight. Survival was earned in moments like these, not given freely. A young engineer on the Aurora whispered, voice trembling, "Why are we still alive?" Because Kellen said, voice firm despite tears, "Someone refuses to let us die?" Voss felt the subtle presence again, a quiet thread running through the chaos, guiding the improbable. Not divine intervention as humans imagined it, but a subtle order. A whisper of balance that favored life when courage and will met the impossible. But the Vulcan were relentless. Another wave approached, faster, coordinated, and smarter. The Resolute strained under the energy of repeated pulses. Systems began to fail, warning lights flickering across the bridge. Voss knew that one more misstep could mean annihilation, not just for him, but for the entire convoy. Merrick's voice was tense. "Commander, the ship, if we fire again, it may not survive." Voss's eyes narrowed. "Then we do it anyway." Humans had survived countless odds because they acted when hesitation was not an option. Courage required sacrifice, or required risk. And sometimes faith, even quiet faith, made the impossible achievable. He activated the final pulse, channeling every ounce of the Resolute's energy into a precise wave that bent space like a blade. The Vulcan formation fractured instantly, destroyers colliding or drifting helplessly in warped space. Some were destroyed outright. Others retreated in confusion, engines overloading. The convoy floated in stunned silence. Sparks and smoke trailed from damaged transports, but no lives were lost this time. Humans breathed, whispered prayers or thanks, and stared at the void with awe. They had survived once more. Voss exhaled, body tense, mind racing. He had given everything: calculation, courage, risk, and a faint whisper of faith to protect them. Humans were relentless, not because they were perfect, but because they refused to surrender, because they could endure, adapt, and act with empathy and intelligence even in the face of annihilation. Somewhere, a child clutched a parent's hand. Not luck. Someone wanted us to live. The whisper came again, and in that subtle acknowledgement, humans felt the quiet presence of something larger, an unseen thread, weaving survival into the improbable. Voss gazed into the void, knowing that the Vulcan would return. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. Yet in the eyes of every human who had survived, he saw the truth of the human spirit. Courage, ingenuity, and faith could bend even the universe itself. And somewhere in the expanse, the humans began to believe that one soul could be an army. The expanse had grown darker, not physically. The stars still glittered in their cold brilliance, but morally, spiritually, and strategically. The weight pressing on humanity had reached its apex. The Vulcan fleet, though fractured, was returning with vengeance in every thrumming engine, every calibrated weapon system. They were no longer hunting, they were punishing. Voss stared at the sensor readouts aboard the Resolute, the dim light from his consoles reflecting off his weathered face. Each reading was a calculus of survival, trajectories, shields, singularities, and the fragile human cargo scattered through the convoy. Every misstep would cost lives. Every decision was absolute. Merrick approached quietly, sensing the storm inside Voss. "They'll destroy everything if we make the wrong move." "How do we not wrong?" Voss interrupted. "We make it right. Humans aren't just targets. We're architects of survival. And the rules of survival aren't written by the hunters, They're written by the desperate, the clever, the defiant. The convoy drifted closer to a dense asteroid field, a natural labyrinth in the expanse. It was risky maneuvering through would-strain human endurance, warp systems, and leave no room for error, but it offered cover. A chance to turn the battlefield to their advantage. Voss calculated quickly. The Virkin would not anticipate humans using debris as both shield and weapon. Inside the convoy, Kellen's hands flew over panels, rerouting power, rerunning emergency protocols. Fear pulsed through her like a second heartbeat, but determination followed every pulse. Humans thrived in moments like these under pressure with nothing but ingenuity and courage to cling to. Voss initiated the maneuver. The Resolute led the convoy into the asteroid field, each ship threading with surgical precision. The Virkin fleet followed, predictably, engines and weapons blazing, plasma lancing through the void. But the field distorted their sensors, forced their destroyers into impossible angles. A collision nearly occurred, one transport scraping the hull of a massive rock butt. Kellen's quick thinking and human reflex saved it. Sweat streamed down her face, heart hammering, mind racing. Each small miracle of survival, each pulse of ingenuity, reinforced the human truth. They were fragile, yes, but not powerless. Then came the choice that would define the human's fate. The Resolute had to activate a final singularity pulse to crush the Virkin fleet. But the energy required would endanger the convoy if miscalculated. Voss knew the cost. He would place every life, every hope, in a gamble only humans could make. Merrick's voice trembled. "Commander, one miscalculation and I know," Voss said, jaw tight. "But we survive because we act. Hesitation is death." The first destroyers fired, plasma bolts striking asteroids that fragmented into debris. The convoy shuddered under shockwaves. Human ingenuity thrived in the chaos engineers improvised. Pilots calculated trajectories instinctively. Families clung together, whispering prayers that were equal parts hope and command. Voss guided the singularity pulse, bending space into a controlled collapse, threading it through the Virkin formation like a scalpel. Destroyers were caught in impossible vectors, engines straining, hulls groaning. One by one, they were dismantled not with luck, but with human precision, courage, and daring. Yet the cost was immediate. The Resolute trembled violently. Warning lights screamed across the bridge. Systems overloaded. Voss gritted his teeth, hands moving faster than thought, steering the ship between annihilation and victory. In the convoy, Kellen felt the tremors, saw panels flicker, heard alarms scream. Fear surged, but determination surged higher. Humans thrived not because of perfection, but because they endured, adapted, and acted when the universe demanded more than they could give. The singularity pulse reached its apex. The Virkin fleet, overconfident and relentless, faltered under the combined force of physics and human ingenuity. Engines collapsed, weapons failed, and the remaining destroyers scattered, retreating into the void. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Humans, battered and trembling, stared into the void, understanding the magnitude of what had been achieved. Not by luck, not by miracles, by courage, by defiance, by the unyielding human will to survive and protect life. Voss exhaled slowly, shoulders tense but steady. He had gambled everything and humans had survived. The quiet presence threaded through his consciousness again, subtle and profound, reminding him that sometimes survival was guided not by chance, but by an unseen balance that favored courage, ingenuity, and faith in action. Kellen turned to her crew, voice trembling but strong. "We survived. Not luck, not accident. Someone wanted us to live." A child whispered from the back of a transport, clinging to a parent's sleeve. "Not luck. Someone wanted us to live." The phrase echoed across the convoy, quiet mantra of resilience, belief, and the unseen hand threading life through chaos. Voss looked out at the stars, knowing the battle was won, but the war remained. The Virkin had learned. The galaxy had learned. Humans were no longer prey. Humans could survive impossible odds, turn chaos into order, and defy annihilation with courage, ingenuity, and subtle faith. And somewhere in the expanse, the humans began to understand that the impossible was only impossible until they acted. The void of the Orion expanse stretched infinitely before them, cold and unyielding. The Verkan fleet had been fractured, their retreat chaotic and desperate. But Voss knew this was only temporary. Space did not forgive weakness, and predators always returned. Humanity had survived. Yes, but the final test had yet to come. Inside the convoy, tension hung like smoke. Transport crews patched holes, rerouted energy, and comforted trembling children. Every human aboard bore the marks of survival blood, sweat, fear, but also the fire of defiance. Survival had been earned through courage, ingenuity, and sheer willpower. Voss stood on the bridge of the resolute eyes scanning the empty void, searching for signs of the returning predators. He knew the Verkan would return smarter, faster, hungrier. This time he would not merely defend, he would end it. Prepare the final sequence, he commanded. Every calculation, every pulse of the singularity, this ends it. Merrick's voice was tight, almost reverent. Are you certain? If this fails? Voss shook his head. It won't. Humans survive because we act when others hesitate, because we endure when others break, because we have the audacity to face impossible odds with everything we have. And this is what we have. The Resolute surged forward, threading a precarious path between asteroid fields and the remaining Vorkan destroyers. Plasma bolts lanced through space, striking asteroids that fragmented and tumbled into the fleet. Each rock a shield, a weapon, and a testament to human ingenuity. Inside the convoy, Kellen barked orders, directing transports with precision, improvising repairs, and rerouting power. Every human aboard moved as one organism, hearts hammering in rhythm with survival, minds sharpening to razor focus. They were fragile, yes, but the sum of their courage was greater than any weapon the Verkan could wield. Voss activated the final singularity pulse. The Resolute trembled violently, systems straining beyond known limits. Gravity bent around them like molten metal, warping space with precise intent. Verkan destroyers faltered, caught in patterns they could not predict. Engines tore themselves apart. Weapons overloaded. The fleet began to collapse inward, one impossible calculation after another. But the pulse required a sacrifice. The Resolute itself strained to breaking, shields flickering, hull warping. Voss's fingers danced across the console, guiding energy, bending space-time, channeling ingenuity into pure will. The crew watched in awe, realizing that survival demanded not just courage, but selflessness. A destroyer charged directly at the Resolute, plasma engines blazing. Voss smiled grimly. "Then you'll come with me," he muttered. He manipulated the singularity with absolute precision, pulling the destroyer into a micro-collapse. The alien vessel shredded itself from within, and the pulse rippled outward, fracturing the remaining ships. Silence followed. The Verkan fleet had been broken, scattered, defeated not by superior numbers or firepower, but by one human's courage, ingenuity, and relentless will. Humans had survived because one had refused to surrender, refused to hesitate, refused to allow fear to dictate the outcome. Inside the convoy, Kellen exhaled, tears streaming, voice trembling. We survived, not luck, not accident. Someone wanted us to live. Voss stared into the void, feeling the subtle presence again, the quiet, unseen intelligence threading the improbable. Not miracles, not divine displays, but something profound, balance, justice, and mercy, woven into the fabric of survival. Humans had acted, the universe had responded, life had endured. He allowed himself a moment to breathe, shoulders tense but resolute. The Resolute had survived, battered but intact. The convoy was safe. Humanity had proven itself, clever, empathetic, indomitable. Somewhere in the transports a child whispered, "Not luck." Someone wanted us to live. The words resonated across corridors and consoles. A quiet acknowledgement of the unseen hand that had guided survival without preaching, without form, without imposition, only subtle presence. Voss turned to Merrick, voice quiet but firm. "Remember this. Humanity doesn't need gods to survive. But there is something that threads through courage, ingenuity, and will. Something that favors those who act, who dare, who refuse to surrender." Merrick nodded, eyes wide with awe. "Well, remember, Commander, always." The convoy floated through the expanse. battered but unbroken, guided by one human who had turned impossibility into survival, fear into courage, and isolation into unity. The galaxy would remember, the Virkin would remember. And humans, fragile yet indomitable, had written a new legacy in the void of space. And somewhere in the infinite black, the humans began to believe, not just in survival, but in themselves. The galaxy had learned a truth it would never forget. Sometimes one human is more than an army.